semuanya, apa kabar? Pastinya kabar baik, bukan? Bersama saya Romeo Dirk Junior di channel yang spesial membahas tentang video-video apologet Kristen dan video-video kesaksian Kristen yang berasal dari sumber-sumber data yang terpercaya dan valid. Video ini bertujuan hanya ingin mengedukasi penonton tentang apa yang dibahas sesuai judul video. Ya, saudara sekalian, untuk lebih jelasnya silakan menonton video berikut ini sampai selesai sehingga Anda bisa paham dan mengerti apa yang dibahas. Jangan lupa tinggalkan pendapat Anda di kolom komentar. Selamat menonton. Terima kasih. God bless you.
My name is Khalid Musa. I'm 38 years old. If you had met me 10 years ago, you'd hardly be here listening to what I have to say. Back then, I was someone people avoided, not because I was someone to admire, but because I inspired fear. I wasn't the type to share stories or feeling. I ended any conversation with violence and a frightening coldness. I was born in a hot, arid region of northern Nigeria, in a city where the dust felt like it was part of your skin, and the sound of the call to prayer shaped every moment of the day. From the first moment I could understand the world around me, Islam wasn't just a belief for me. It was like the air I breathed, essential and absolute. My earliest memories are permeated by my father's steady voice, reciting verses from the Quran before sunrise, filling the house with that solemn, ritualistic sound. My mother, ever devoted, would push me to the madrasa, even when the sky was still dark and the first rays of sunlight were slow to appear. We grew up in poverty, a poverty that wasn't desperate enough to leave us hungry, but it did leave a kind of hardness in our hearts. It was that poverty that taught me from an early age that the outside world wouldn't love or help you unless you made others fear what you were capable of. My father was a proud and strict man, a true pillar of discipline in our home. He taught me two rules that seemed unbreakable: never question Allah and never show any sign of weakness. If I cried, no matter how small, his gaze would turn cold and cutting, as if I had committed an unforgivable mistake. "Harden your heart, Khaled," he would say. "A man's tears are for Allah, and him alone, in secret." I grew up memorizing surahs before I could even write my own name, and the imam at our mosque would look at me with hope, telling me I was destined for great things. I thought great meant holy, pure, an example of faith, but over time, I learned it could also mean something much darker and more frightening. When I turned 16, war began to invade our daily lives like a silent, lethal shadow. The name Boko Haram ceased to be a whispered rumor and became a real, terrifying presence. They arrived like men on motorcycles, armed, shouting Allahu Akbar as they left behind clouds of smoke and destruction. My friends were afraid, but I saw something different. I saw power. They commanded respect and obedience with nothing more than a menacing glare and a raised rifle. The first recruiter I met placed a firm hand on my shoulder and asked, "Young man, do you want to be a lion or a sheep?" In that moment, at 16, I knew my answer. My father tried to resist, but it wasn't out of fear of what might happen to me. It was fear of losing control, of seeing the son he knew disappear. When the imam at the local mosque spoke to him about the importance of defending Islam and purifying our land, his resistance shattered like glass. That Friday afternoon, after the Jummah prayer, I was taken to a camp hidden in the bush, far from everything I knew. It was there, on that day, that the boy Khalid died forever, and the warrior Ked was born. We were trained to obey without question, to transform faith into a weapon and obedience into blind strength. They placed a rifle in my hands before even teaching me to aim properly, telling me that faith, if not directed, could turn against you. Nights were spent around campfires, where commanders used the Quran and Hadith to justify every act of violence they ordered us to commit. We watched videos of battle, learning to celebrate the death of our enemies as if it were a sacred triumph. I swallowed all those lies as if they were the purest truth, and little by little, I became what they wanted me to be. At 25, I was no longer just a common soldier. I was a commander. If you had seen me then, you would have seen a man who inspired fear and respect in equal measure. Broad shoulders, a firm voice that silenced crowds, and a rifle always slung across my back, ready for whatever might come. My men obeyed me blindly, and the name Khalid made the villages shudder with dread. Mothers hid their children as I passed, and men looked at me with fear. But inside me, behind that mask of power, there was a vast emptiness, a deep wound in my chest that nothing could fill. It wasn't the money we earned, nor the respect I commanded, nor the fear in the eyes of other men. It was a silent, nagging ache, a hole I hid at all costs, because in that world, admitting something was wrong was synonymous with weakness. At night, when the camp finally fell silent, I would lie down on my makeshift mat and turn my eyes to the starry sky. The desert sky of northern Nigeria is something you never forget, so vast and clear, it seems almost within reach, like an endless blanket of brilliant lights. In these moments of solitude, a doubt gnawed at my heart. If Allah is truly so great and full of mercy, as we were always taught, why did my soul feel suffocating, as if trapped in an invisible cage? Why did the sacred verses I recited with fervor seem more like insurmountable walls than open doors to freedom? It was a silent anguish I never shared with anyone. Not my brothers in arms, not my wife Zainab, not even myself. I buried these thoughts in an avalanche of blood and orders. It was easier to drown my doubts in violin and keep my heart hardened. I met Zainab when I was 28. She wasn't like the other women in our camp. There was a deep calm about her, a watchful, discerning gaze that seemed to see beyond the obvious. Her hijab was always impeccably arranged, and her voice was sweet, but charged with a firmness that soothed me. I married her quickly. As expected for someone in my position, she became my safe haven amid the chaos and fire of war. In the rare moments when the violence gave way, I would return home exhausted and sit beside her, listening to her old songs while she gently cooked. She never asked questions about what I did outside. She knew it was better this way. In her presence, I could almost pretend I was just a husband, not the warlord feared by so many. But looking back now, I can see the cracks beginning to appear, not just in me, but in the entire world I had built with so much effort and blood. My men were growing restless, impatient. The attacks became increasingly brutal, and the orders I gave were turning into cruel, inhuman commands. We no longer fought for a just cause, if we ever fought at all, but for greed, power, and a thirst for revenge, all disguised in sacred verses and religious justifications. I began to notice my men's glances toward Zainab, looks laden with intent that frightened me. At first, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was paranoia, the result of constant stress. But deep down, I knew a storm was brewing, about to destroy everything. Before I continue, I need to say something important, not just for myself, but for you who are listening to this story now. Perhaps you are watching this safely, far from the dust, fear, and violence that marked my youth. Or perhaps you are experiencing a similar darkness, trapped by a religion, a system, or even your own guilt and suffering. I am sharing all of this not to entertain, but because I believe my story can be a beacon for those who think there is no way out, for those who believe hope is lost. If you've made it this far, I urge you from the bottom of my heart to subscribe to this channel, like this video, leave a comment, and share this message with someone who needs to hear that. No matter how far you've come, God's grace can reach you and transform your life. At that time, I didn't know Jesus, I didn't know true grace, and I didn't even know what it meant to truly love. All I knew was the man I had become, Khalid Musa, commander of Boko Haram. But that man, who seemed invincible, was about to die, not by a bullet, not by a knife, but by something no enemy could take away. It all began the night I returned home to find the air heavy, a silence deeper than usual, and Zainab's eyes filled with a pain I had never seen before. It was at that moment that everything began to unravel. I had done things with my own hands that still stain my dreams, blood that no amount of washing could wash away. To the world, I was a commander, a powerful and feared figure, but deep down, I was just a broken weapon, a man who had long forgotten what it meant to be human. In those years, my life was about attacks. Violence dictated every second, every choice, every breath. We entered the villages like raging storms, loud, sudden, and relentless. The roar of motorcycles cut through the silence of the hot air, while rifles fired flares into the darkness or under the blazing sun. Men shouted, "Allahu Akbar," in voices thick with fanaticism and rage, and women and children scattered in terror, fleeing like frightened birds amid the chaos. We convinced ourselves this was jihad, that we were defending Islam and purifying the land of infidel. But deep down, what we really sought was absolute control, the power that came from intimidation and fear. The Quran was used as a shield and justification, but the true goal was to dominate, to impose our will at any cost. When I killed a man for the first time, I felt nothing. No guilt, no relief, no sense of victory came, just a deep emptiness, a dark hole in my chest that seemed to absorb everything. The commanders around me praised me, saying I possessed the heart of a true mujahid, a warrior dedicated to the sacred cause. Over time, I learned to decipher the gaze of those who know their lives are about to end. There comes a moment when their eyes glaze over, as if trying to capture the last image of the world before departing. Some fight desperately, others beg for mercy, and some simply stare, accepting their fate. Those gazes haunted me even in my sleep, like ghosts refusing to go away. My men feared me, and in our world, fear and respect were the same thing. I had built a ruthless reputation. Khalid Musa was a name that posed no doubt. I never wavered, never showed weakness, and never spared anyone the elders branded as an enemy. They trusted me to lead, to inspire blind obedience, and I trusted they would obey without question. But in the quiet moments, when the adrenaline of battle wore off, I found myself trapped in the sounds of the villages we destroyed, the anguished wails of mothers, the heavy silence that fell after a rifle shot, the metallic, acidic smell of blood mixed with the dust of the dry earth. These sounds and images were the ghosts he carried, though he never admitted it to anyone. We always found a passage in the Quran or the Hadith to justify each act of violence. We made the killing and terror sacred. I clearly remember one night, around the campfire, when an elder sat nearby and recited in a firm voice, Surah 8:12, "I will strike terror into the hearts of the disbelievers. Therefore, cut off their heads." He spoke it as if it were powerful poetry, smiling as the flames reflected in his eyes, full of fervor and cruelty. That night, I went to sleep with a heavy thought. How easy it is to turn God into a weapon, a pretext for evil. The months passed, and my hands grew more blood-stained, my heart harder. I stopped counting the number of attacks. Villages began to blur into one another, each a grim repetition of the last. I rode into battle, gave orders, and watched my men execute them with the precision of a well-trained machine. In our world, there was no room for doubt or hesitation. Any sign of weakness could be fatal. Hesitation meant death for you or someone you loved. But even in that deep darkness, certain moments pierced my armor. During one raid, we captured a group of Christians who refused to renounce their faith. Among them was an old man with white hair and trembling hands, who looked me in the eye and said something that echoed inside me like thunder. "You think you're strong, but you're the most tied-up man here." I silenced him with a blow, but those words stuck in me like thorns. The elders didn't like loose ends. When they encountered resistance, they demanded that we set an example, which meant public execution to intimidate and break any opposition. My men took pride in being chosen for these cruel tasks, and I continued to lead, command, pushing them ever further into the abyss. But I began to feel something new within me. It wasn't compassion, but a deep exhaustion, a weariness of the soul that no amount of sleep could alleviate. Still, I continued. The routine of the raids became mechanical, almost automatic, until the day everything changed. We received news of a village suspected of harboring government informant. The elders ordered me to personally lead the attack. At dawn, we advanced. I gave the orders, and my men carried them out with ruthless, almost mechanical precision. Houses were set ablaze, the fire consuming roofs and walls as the smell of burning wood mingled with the dust of the dry ground. Cattle were slaughtered mercilessly, a brutal way to steal the villagers' livelihood. People were gathered together, some weeping, others silent, resigned to their fate. The boom of gunfire echoed like war drums in my ears, hammering a somber rhythm that seemed to accelerate my heart. When it was all over, I stood in the middle of the destroyed village, surrounded by clouds of smoke and a heavy, almost suffocating silence. My men began to celebrate, firing shots into the air and letting out laughter that seemed shrill in such a devastated landscape. It was as if it were a victory festival for them. I should have felt proud. After all, this was yet another achievement for our cause, a demonstration of strength and power. But strangely, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just a strange, oppressive weight squeezing my chest, as if something inside me were breaking. As we prepared to leave, one of my lieutenants approached, smiling proudly. "Commander, this will be remembered for months," he said. "The elders will be proud." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone. I couldn't get the old man we'd captured days before out of my mind. The white-haired man who'd called me chained. The word echoed inside me like an insistent whisper, an uncomfortable truth I didn't want to hear, but which stubbornly refused to abandon. That night, back at camp, I lay awake on my mat, listening to the light, calm breathing of my men around me. My rifle lay beside me, my boots still soiled with the ash from the village. For the first time in years, I wondered what all this was really for. I had power. I had fear in the eyes of everyone who saw me. I had the absolute loyalty of my soldier. But peace? I didn't have that, and deep down, I knew I never would. Little did I know that that day marked the beginning of my downfall. The victory in that village was the last one that truly felt like a victory. After that, every mission, every order, every drop of blood spilled only added weight to a burden I could no longer bear. The day I returned from that attack, I had no idea what awaited me at home. A battle no weapon could win, a struggle that would destroy the foundations of the life I had built. I still remember the smell when I walked through the door, the smoke from the fireplace still clinging to my clothes, mingled with the gentle aroma of the food Zanab had prepared. I called her name, hoping to hear the welcoming response that always came, that calm, comforting voice that used to bring me some measure of peace. But in that moment, there was only silence, a silence so heavy it seemed to portend the worst. The door creaked as it was pushed open, and silence seemed to fill every corner of the house. Zanab usually greeted me with a loving look, even when she didn't approve of what I did to survive. She had learned to live with the blood on my clothes, the scars on my hand, or at least, I thought she had. I called her name again, louder, but still nothing. A strange weight hung in the air, the kind that tightens your chest before you even understand why. I walked into our small living room, and my eyes fell on a cup lying on the floor, a dark tea stain spreading across the worn carpet. My heart raced. Near the bedroom door, I saw her scarf crumpled on the floor, a completely unusual sight. I picked up the fabric between my fingers, feeling its soft touch, but a sick feeling rose in my stomach, a knot tightening my chest. I pushed the door open slowly and found her sitting on the edge of the bed. Her posture was straight, but her shoulders trembled. When she looked up, I saw something I'd never imagined I'd see. Her swollen, red eyes, the bruises at the corners of her mouth, clear signs of pain and suffering. My breath caught in my throat, unable to form words. Finally, I managed to whisper, "I'm sorry." "Zanab, what happened?" My voice came out low, filled with a new pain, an unknown fear. I was already thinking about the next village to burn, the next man to be taken from life. When I heard those words, Zanab's lips trembled, and her voice broke into broken sobs, so fragile it seemed almost impossible they could come from such a small body. "They're coming. Your men are coming while you're gone." The earth seemed to slip beneath my feet, the ground tilting as if I were about to fall into an endless abyss. "Your men?" I asked, even though I already knew the bitter answer I expected to hear. My hands clenched into fists, my pulse pounding like a frantic drum in my ears. "They said they had your permission." Zainab's voice faltered. "They laughed when I said no. Her speech broke, giving way to sobs that racked her entire body. I didn't need her to finish. The brutal images formed in my mind, clear and relentless. My men, those very men who swore loyalty to me, whom I called brothers, soldiers, the very men I was supposed to protect, had become something I couldn't recognize. I sat up slowly, the world spinning around me, my knees nearly giving up. For a moment, I was speechless, breathless, unable even to process the betrayal that had infiltrated my own home. It was as if the ground had disappeared from under me. "Who? Tell me the names." I dragged the words out, trying to maintain some composure, but she only shook her head, a deep sadness in her eyes. "It doesn't matter. They're all the same." Her voice was a direct, merciless blow. "You think you lead them, that you control them, but no, you've become one of them." Those words cut deeper than any knife, more painful than the worst physical wound. I wanted to scream that she was wrong, that I was different, that there was still hope. But what could I prove? I had built my reputation on violence, fear, and blind obedience. I had unleashed these men into the world to sow destruction, and now ruin was knocking at my own door. I stood and began pacing, my mind a whirlwind of anger, shame, and confusion. The first thought was revenge, hunting them down, punishing them, making them pay for what they had done. But behind that fury, something darker whispered, an inner voice I couldn't silence. "This is what you built. This is the fruit of your hands." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat outside under the silent, starry desert sky, the cold air enveloping my weary body. Every distant sound made me shiver, not for fear of the enemy, but for fear of what I myself had become. I had always prided myself on my authority, believing it would keep everything in order. Now the truth was hitting me. It was all a fragile lie, a house of cards about to collapse. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, I returned to the house. Zainab lay in bed, her back to me, breathing raggedly. I wanted to reach out, hold her, tell her everything would be okay, but I didn't know how. My presence, once a comfort, was now a painful reminder of the danger I posed to her life. It was at that moment that I first considered walking away, from command, from the men, from the war, from everything. But then came the next, even crueler thought. Where would I go? Who would I be without all this? My identity, my existence, were intertwined with that struggle, with the jihad, with that bloody brotherhood. Without them, I was nothing. And that was when I remembered the old man's words, "You are the most imprisoned man here." Before, I would have laughed at those words, dismissed them as madness. Now, I understood. My men's betrayal wasn't just their failure. It was my undoing, the shattering of the world I had built for myself. In that open wound inside me, something began to stir. It wasn't hope yet. It was a strange sensation, a faint longing for something different, something pure, something I'd never known. I didn't know it at the time, but this seed of longing would lead me down paths I never imagined. Paths that would force me to face the one thing I'd been running from my entire life, the truth. I thought I knew anger, that I knew pain, but nothing compared to the empty ache that settled in my chest. After Zainab's eyes stopped meeting mine, she moved through the house like a shadow, almost invisible, distant, and silent, as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. I had always been her protector, her shield against anything that might threaten her. But in that moment, I had become nothing more than a painful reminder of what had wounded her heart. I tried to face the men I suspected, calling them out in front of the others, confronting them with a voice that trembled with rage and despair. But they were undaunted. They laughed, as if I were a fool. "Commander," one of them said with a mocking smile, "are we not entitled to the spoils of war?" Those words froze me. I wanted to tear her life away right then and there. but I knew I needed the Sharia Council's verdict to act with justice. I went to the elders, those who for years had received my blind loyalty and obedience. With a heavy heart, I told them what had happened, hoping my pain would be acknowledged, that justice would be served, that there would be some condemnation of this betrayal. But to my surprise and sadness, they responded with quotations from hadiths and doctrines, twisting each word like a sharp knife to justify the unjustifiable. A wife is her husband's property, they said. One of the elders, a firm, cold voice, declared, "If she is taken by another, it is his honor that is at stake, not hers. Do not provoke bloodshed through misunderstanding." To them, her tears, the bruises that marred her face, and her pain-filled silence were mere disposable detail, irrelevant to the laws that governed everything. I left that room with trembling hand, a whirlwind of thoughts and a crushed heart. For the first time, I felt the words I had always recited with devotion were empty, bitter dust in my mouth. Every time I bowed to pray, the image of Zainab in pain invaded me. I saw the cruel smile of the man who had hurt her, and the cold eyes of the elders who had done nothing to protect her. The days passed, turning into weeks, and my prayers seemed to vanish into the void, unanswered. My heavy heart, filled with doubt and anguish, was tormented by dark dreams. I dreamed I was bound in heavy chains, being dragged by invisible forces through an endless desert. No matter how hard I struggled to free myself, the chains only cut into my skin and plunged me deeper into that darkness. I woke sweating, my heart pounding, my hands clutching the sheets, searching for something, anything, to anchor me to reality. Seeking to escape that torture, I began spending my nights on my phone, browsing aimlessly, trying to find distraction, some relief. It was then that, during one of these searches, I found a forum unlike anything I'd ever known. It wasn't a traditional religious site, but real stories, accounts of men and women who had abandoned Islam. Some were from Nigeria, others from faraway places in the Middle East. At first, I read it with anger, calling them apostates, traitors. But the more I read, something deep inside me began to stir. These people spoke of finding peace not by rejecting God, but by discovering Him through Isa al-Masih, Jesus, the Messiah. For a long time, I thought this was dangerous, that just reading such things put my life at risk. If anyone knew, I could be punished, perhaps even killed. Still, I couldn't stop. The words seeped into my soul like fresh water in a dry, parched land. One night, I came across a verse someone had shared. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." The word relief hit me like a blow. I hadn't felt rest in years. My body might be strong, my name feared, but my soul was exhausted, broken, lost. I told no one about it, not even Zainab, nor my men, whom I trusted most. This was my deepest secret, my silent rebellion, not against the world, but against the lies I had built my entire life on. There, in some deep corner of my soul, a seed, dangerous and unknown, began to take hold, taking silent and unexpected root. I wasn't sure what it would grow into, nor where it would lead me, but I knew one thing clearly. I could no longer close my eyes to what I was beginning to see. Allah's silence, which had once felt like mere absence, became a constant weight, impossible to ignore. On one of those warm nights, the kind where the air feels heavy, dense, almost suffocating, Zainab had already fallen asleep hours ago, but I remained awake, lying on my mattress, staring at the ceiling, and losing count of the questions that hammered incessantly in my head. Who was I really? What did I still believe in? Was there really a God who cared, who listened, who was present? These doubts swirled, making my mind spin restlessly. Then, between wakefulness and sleep, something shifted. The room around me began to fade, as if reality were slowly dissolving. The air grew cool, lighter, and strangely pure, unlike anything I had felt before. I found myself standing on the bank of a calm, wide and silent river, where the water shimmered with a light I couldn't identify. It wasn't the sun nor the moon, but something much softer and more powerful. The surroundings were still, but every sound seemed amplified. the delicate rustle of invisible leaves, and the soft sound of water lapping at the shore. And then I saw him, a man dressed entirely in white, his clothes seemingly made of light itself, so brilliant they eclipsed any darkness around him. But it wasn't just the brightness that held my gaze. It was his eyes, deep, warm, steady, as if they saw not just through my skin, but through every barrier I'd built around my heart. He spoke my name, not as one who reads a random word, but as one who has known the soul since before the world began. "Come to me," he said. "I know your pain. Come to me, and I will give you rest." The moment I heard those words, something inside me shattered. Years of accumulated anger, guilt, shame, and grief surged to the surface, overwhelming me all at once. I collapsed to my knees, my body heavy and my heart overflowing. I wanted to ask who he was, but my voice caught, choked in my throat. He reached out to me. No pressure, no demand, just a silent, patient offer. I woke up gasping, my body drenched in sweat, tears streaming uncontrollably down my face. My chest felt lighter, as if the chains that had bound me during that terrible dream had finally been broken. I sat there in the dark, my hands shaking, trying to understand. That voice was the same as the verse I had read in the forum. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." It couldn't be a mere coincidence. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone and typed the verse of rest attributed to Jesus into the search bar. The first result took me to the book of Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28. Exactly the same words. I stood there, lost in time, scrolling, reading every text, every testimony I could find about Isa al-Masih. I read about how he healed the sick, forgave sinners, reached out to the rejected and marginalized, and how he loved even those who hated him. No imam, no religious leader, had ever spoken of Allah this way. For them, Allah was synonymous with power, judgment, and absolute submission. But Jesus was different. He was pure, unconditional love. Night after night, I returned to that online angel, feeling his words pierce my soul in ways I couldn't explain. When he spoke of forgiving 70 times 7, my thoughts went straight to Zanab's bruised eyes. When he spoke of loving one's enemies, I saw the cold faces of the men I had ordered executed. When he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," I knew, in that instant, I had found something Boko Haram could never offer me: real hope, true freedom. I hadn't told anyone about this dream, at least not yet, but deep down, I knew that the man dressed in white hadn't been just a passing illusion. He had called me by name, had reached me in my deepest pain, and I knew, with a certainty I couldn't ignore, that no matter what, I would have to answer that call. Whispers travel fast, much faster than bullets, in our camps. I began to sense something changing around me. I felt heavy gazes staring at me for too long, the kind that doesn't easily turn away. Voices lowered as I passed, as if my name were a forbidden secret. Gradually, I stopped leading the attacks, a decision I explained to them with simple excuses, saying I was tired, that an old injury still bothered me. But the truth ran much deeper. Something inside me refused to raise my weapon as before, to summon violence with the same conviction. It all began the day a young Christian man was brought from a nearby village. He was brought in tied up, his wrists bruised, his shirt torn, and his face swollen from the beatings he had suffered. One of the younger fighters, full of ardor, handed me a rifle and said defiantly, "Commander, give the order. Show that you are still with us." I looked into the prisoner's eyes and saw no fear there. I saw a steady calm, a peace that disturbed me more than any words could. It was as if I saw reflected in that gaze the man in white from my dream, as if he were there, among us. My hand froze on the trigger. The young fighter grew impatient. His eyes narrowed. "Commander!" he demanded, almost angrily. So I lowered the gun, my heart pounding and my voice trembling. "Let him go." The words sounded strange, almost bitter, coming from my mouth. The men looked at each other, confused and suspicious. "This man is a kafir," one said accusingly. Another shouted, "He is an enemy of Allah." But I repeated firmly, in a low voice that brooked no dispute, "Let him go." It was there, in that moment, that everything began to crumble. The walls that had supported my position began to close in around me. A few nights later, I was summoned by the elders, who were waiting for me with hard faces, without any compassion. Khalid, one of them, spoke first. "Your leadership is being questioned. There are rumors of weakness, of doubts in your heart." "It's not weakness," I replied. "It's justice. Not every man we capture deserves death." One of them leaned forward, his eyes sharp as razors. "The Quran is clear," he said menacingly. "Are you saying Allah is wrong?" I didn't answer. My silence spoke louder than any words could have. That night, when I returned to my quarters, I found Zainab looking at me with concern. "You need to be careful," she whispered. "They say you speak of things that are not Islamic. Your own brothers will turn against you." She was right. It was already happening. My cousins, my fellow soldiers, avoided my gaze, barely concealing their distrust. And then came my father's message, delivered by messenger. "Prove your loyalty to Islam before it's too late." I knew what this meant. It was a call to shed blood, to wash away my suspicion of blasphemy with blood. But I couldn't anymore. Something deep inside me had changed. Jesus' words, the memory of the voice I heard in the dream, the inexplicable peace I felt each time I read the verse in the forum, all of it was too powerful to ignore. I began to prepare myself for what I knew was coming. If they came after me, I wouldn't fight them. But I also wouldn't give up what I had begun to believe. At night, in secret, I prayed. Not to Allah, but to the one I'd seen by the riverbank in my dream. I didn't know the right words, just saying, "If you're real, hold me. I'm afraid." The fear was real, yes, but there was something new inside me, a determination I had never felt before. I was already hiding, avoiding eyes, shifting like a shadow. Word spread quickly that I was confused, dangerous, even a traitor to the cause. In our world, such words are a death sentence. I moved between empty cabins and dense forest, sometimes sleeping with one ear open, my hand tightly gripping a small knife, my last resort for protection. One such night, when the moon hung low in the sky, thin and sharp as a scythe, I found a small refuge in an old mud house. The floor was cracked and covered in accumulated dust, but for me it was shelter. There, in the silence of the night, I could just exist for a moment, away from the eyes, away from the weapons, with my heart still beating, full of fear and hope at the same time. I had managed to hide my small cell phone, a cheap device, its screen scratched and its speaker barely working, almost like a broken toy. To others, it might seem useless, but to me, it was my only connection to the outside world, my only contact with that angel, and with a hope I barely understood. A few weeks earlier, I had downloaded a Bible app, and in the few gaps of silence and darkness, I secretly read its pages, as if it were a forbidden treasure. That night, I opened the Gospel of John, my hands trembling slightly. My eyes fell on a verse that seemed to have been written especially for me. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." It was as if those words were waiting for me, whispering directly to my exhausted heart. I was more than tired. I was crushed, carrying a lifetime too heavy to bear, full of anger, duty, and spilled blood. I continued reading. John spoke of a God who loved the world so much that he gave his only son. It seemed impossible. In Islam, Allah loves those who obey and punishes those who disobey, a love conditioned by fear and submission. But these words, this love, was different, a love that reached me even before I did anything to deserve it. In that moment, I thought of all the faces that had passed through my life, the men I had ordered executed, the women who had screamed for mercy, the children who had fled in terror. And a question crept into my mind. If Jesus really was who he said he was, could he forgive me? I didn't kneel, not because I didn't want to, but because I simply didn't know how. I just sat there, head in my hands, and whispered, "Jesus, if you're the Lord, I'm yours. Take my life. It's all I have left." No sooner had the words left my mouth than something inside me snapped. Years of hardness, anger, and control shattered in an instant. I began to cry, loud, ugly sobs that shook my entire body. as if I were releasing a weight I'd been carrying for a long time. And then came peace. It wasn't the kind of relief you have after escaping danger or winning a fight. It was something deeper, more genuine. It was as if someone had entered that dusty room of my soul, lifted the burden from my shoulders, and breathed new life into me. I was no longer the commander. I was no longer the hunter, the executioner, the servant of death. I was someone redeemed, someone with a chance at a new beginning. I didn't understand everything, nor did I know what would come next. But one thing was certain. I had crossed a line, and there was no way back. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without fear. The peace I felt wasn't a passing illusion. It was real. But peace doesn't erase danger. It doesn't change the brutal world I came from. When I finally told my family, it was like a bomb had gone off in our house. My father's voice shook like thunder. "You're not my son. You've spit on our parents' faith." My mother spent the entire night crying, clutching her scarf, begging me to tell her I'd made a mistake. "Khalid, it's Cheyenne who's deceiving you. Come back before it's too late." I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to tell her that I was still her son. But the truth was too harsh. The moment I chose Jesus, I also chose exile. My brothers stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes filled with judgment. They didn't need to say anything. The verdict was clear on their faces. The next day, the news spread like wildfire. Old comrades began hunting me. They didn't want debate. They didn't want dialogue. They wanted to erase me, to make me disappear forever. That night, I left. I took almost nothing, just my phone, a small bag of food, and the clothes I was wearing, already worn and sweaty. I set off along the back paths, moving stealthily under the cover of darkness, every noise making me jump. The snap of a twig, the rustle of dry leaves, even the distant bark of a dog felt like a threat. When dawn finally arrived, I was already deep in the dense forest, surrounded by nature that seemed both friendly and threatening. The incessant buzzing of mosquitoes filled my ears. The air was heavy and humid, almost suffocating. My legs ached with every step. My throat burned with thirst, but I simply couldn't stop. I knew they might be behind me, hunting every trace left in the dirt. Fear and adrenaline drove me forward, despite the overwhelming fatigue. Hours later, nearly stumbling from exhaustion, I spotted a small compound hidden among thick trees, like a well-kept secret deep in the forest. It was a shelter run by Christians, brave men and women who risked their own lives to protect people like me, fleeing a seemingly endless war. A thin man with eyes full of kindness and serenity opened the gate without a word, simply motioning me inside. Inside, the air smelled simple but welcoming, a mixture of wood smoke and freshly baked bread. They offered me water, food, and a place to rest. And even though I couldn't bring myself to thank them, I felt a strange warmth, a touch of humanity amidst so much chaos. That night, as I lay on a thin, hard mattress, distant gunshots rang out through the silence of the darkness. The sound was faint, but all too familiar to me, a cruel reminder that my old life still haunted me. Men I had once commanded were now hunting for my own life. In that darkness, I whispered a prayer with a heavy heart. Lord, hide me. Make me invisible to them and to the evil that pursues me. For the first time, my words didn't ask for the strength to kill or to survive another battle. I no longer asked for power or revenge. I asked to live and continue on that new path, no matter how difficult, no matter the cost. Months passed in that safe house that became my little world. Nights were filled with Bible studies by the flickering light of lanterns, silent whispered prayers, and the discreet movement of others who, like me, came and went under the cover of shadow. But there was one pain that never left me. Zainab. I didn't know if she was safe, if she still remembered me, or if she still thought of me at all. One morning, after a full night of prayer and restlessness, I knew I couldn't stay away from her any longer. It was time to face my fear and return. I put on a simple robe and a warm hat, ducked my head so as not to be seen, and left before dawn. I moved like a shadow along the dirt road, always keeping to the edges of the forest, where the undergrowth offered some protection. My heart pounded with each step as I approached the village, which, even in its morning silence, pulsed with vivid memory. When I finally spotted the mud houses, my chest tightened. Memories came flooding back, children chasing goats in the dust, the call to prayer echoing from the mosque in the distance, my mother cooking to the tune of the wind and the seasons. I found Zainab in the courtyard of her father's house, busy hanging wet clothes on the line. When she saw me, she froze for a moment, a heavy moment, filled with silence and suppressed emotions, her eyes filled with tears, and all she could whisper was, "Cold." I took a step forward, wanting to speak, wanting to explain everything, but before I could say a word, a harsh voice cut through the air behind me. "Commander Khalid, or rather, apostate." I turned slowly and found the village imam, his white robe fluttering in the dry wind, his beard flecked with gray that gave weight to his authority. A small crowd was beginning to gather around him, faces stern, eyes filled with judgment. "You have shamed your family," he said, his voice sharp as a blade. "You have rejected Allah, and now you dare come back here?" The crowd murmured, some angrily, some just curiously, but I could feel the weight of each gaze piercing my soul. "I have found the truth," I replied firmly, though my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. "The truth is in Isa al-Masih, Jesus Christ." The imam's face darkened, like a storm about to break out. "You desecrate this place with the name of a false prophet," he declared. "You have dishonored the Shida. Repent now, or face the consequences." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that decision. There was no denying the truth that echoed within me. He gave his life for me, a sacrifice so profound it could never be exchanged for fear or retreat. That firm conviction made the tension that filled the room dissipate like a receding storm, leaving the air heavy and humid, but calmer. Suddenly, a clamor erupted around me. Angry voices, quickened footsteps, clenched fists bearing down on me. I heard Zainab's anguished cry, trying to reach me, but my eyes were fixed on the approaching crowd, and I was trapped, unable to move. It was then that, unexpectedly, a young man I'd never seen before appeared at my side, gripping my arm firmly but without violence. "Come with me," he whispered, with an urgency that brooked no delay. Without hesitation, we ran through narrow, dirty alleys, the sounds of our pursuers echoing ominously behind us. We found a hidden passage between two crumbling walls, and there we crouched, panting, our hearts pounding, as if they were about to leap out of our chests. We remained in absolute silence, waiting for the footsteps to recede until the danger had passed. The young man turned to me and, for the first time, smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it held a warmth that surprised me. "You are not alone in this fight," he said with conviction. "We are far more than you imagine." As we walked toward the safe haven in the shadows of the woods, I realized something essential. My true battle had never been against men, not even against the imam or those who accused me. The true confrontation was with that deep, ancient darkness that had once completely dominated me. Now, I belonged to the light that had found and transformed me. Today, I live under a new name. The world may still know me by other names, but before God, I am simply His son, a redeemed son. Each morning, the crowing of roosters awakens the small Christian village that welcomed me. The air carries the comforting scent of smoke from campfires, mingled with the laughter of children running through the green fields. Here, I am no longer hunted or feared, though I know the danger never entirely disappears. My days are now filled with honest work. I unload trucks loaded with sacks of grain, help rebuild homes burned by the fires of war, and deliver supplies to families who have suffered the same violence I myself once commanded. Sometimes, when I carry a sack of rice to a widow's hut or hold a crying orphan in my arms, a deep pain grips my chest. It's the cruel reminder of the man I was, the choices I made, the lives I took. But I've learned that Jesus doesn't erase our past like a slate. He transforms it, redeems it, and this truth gives me hope. Zainab came back to live with me, though it took months for her to trust again, for her to believe that the man she once feared was gone forever, and that what stood before her was someone new, a different man. We still carry scars, hers, visible on her scarred skin, mine, hidden in our hearts and souls. But together, every night, we kneel in prayer. And today, when she smiles, it's a smile born of peace, not obligation or fear. One afternoon, I found myself sharing my story in the village square with a group of young people. There were Christians and Muslims among them, all attentive and curious. I spoke of the emptiness that consumed my soul, of the days when, as a commander, I faced Allah's silence, and of the man dressed in white who called my name that night, that changed everything. I told them of the indescribable peace I found when I surrendered to Jesus. True freedom, I said, has a name, and that name is Jesus Christ. I saw tears glistening in the eyes of a boy, a teenager who was already being tempted by the same dark path I once walked. He whispered softly, "I want to know this Jesus. That's why I keep speaking. That's why I keep going to places where I can be recognized. Because the same grace that reached me in the depths of my sin is still seeking me and can seek anyone. I am no longer the Khalid who once sowed fear and destruction. Today, I am Khalid, the redeemed, a man transformed by the love that saved. And if he could save me, he can save anyone, no matter how lost they are." So if you're listening to this right now and feel trapped in a darkness with no escape, whether it's a lifeless religion, a guilt that eats away at your heart, or a past you can't escape, know that there is someone who sees you, who calls your name with love, and who gave his life so that you can be truly free. Come to him. The path may be difficult and costly, but the reward is eternal.